This is September 14th, 1984. I'm Joe Todd, and we're interviewing Mrs. Metta Ediger. Ediger. I'm sorry. Where were you born?
Born in Higgins, Texas.
And when's your birthday?
December the 12th. I was born in December the 17th,
1912. Who is your father?
James H. Frost.
I'm sorry?
James H. Frost.
James H. Frost. Who is your mother?
Clara Morgan Frost.
Were they from Texas?
Originally from Iowa and Missouri. Dad's from Missouri, mother from Iowa.
When did you all come to Oklahoma?
I was 3 months old.
How come your folks came up here?
They never did say other than they didn't particularly like it in Higgins, Texas, and my grandfather had moved up here, so they came up.
And where'd you settle?
First 2 years of my life, we lived just across the river on Hastings Ranch, which is just across on the north side of North Canadian.
That here north of Woodward?
About a mile
Okay.
north of town.
What kind of work did your father do?
It's a farmer.
Farmer? As a little girl, what chores did you do in the farm?
Plenty. We moved to the Tangier community when I was about between 2 and 3. While my brother was crippled, and hence a lot of the work. I picked up a lot of his work also. It was always our chore to bring in coal, wood, kindling, carry out ashes, bring in water. Of course, we had to carry water, and help milk, round up the horses to do the work as we worked with mules. When I got older, worked in the field.
You plow?
Plowed.
You plowed horses or mules?
Mules.
Mules. Mm-hmm. Is there an advantage to using mules over horses?
Dad thought there was because they were tougher and were actually easier keepers than horses.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you start to school?
Tangier.
Tangier?
I went through the entire school at Tangier.
Is that the name of the school, Tangier?
Tangier School.
Who was your first teacher?
I don't even remember her name. We had, when I first started, we were in, it was 4 grades. There was 13 of the kids that used to, you went to primer about Thanksgiving, and then you went into the 1st grade. She had so many kids that I was, spent the full year in primer. We read our book upside down, sideways, whatever. Hence, we had plenty of time to get into mischief.
What kind of mischief you get into?
Well, at one time, one of our mothers came to visit, and her daughter and another little boy, decided they wanted to entertain her, and they was doing handsprings out in the aisle and such as that. Of course, she suffered for it when she got home, but that year kids got demerits, and when they got 15, they got to go to see our principal was Floyd Hayes, and we knew what we got when we went to see Mr. Hayes. We always got paddled. So we were really pretty ornery the first part of the month, but the last of the month we were real nice. And not very many went to see Mr. Hayes.
What kind of crops did you raise on the farm?
Mostly, when we first started in, it was sowed feed, maize, Kaffir, Dad has raised broom corn, he's raised wheat. It's my job in harvest to drive the header barge.
You ever pull broom corn?
Never could. My job is picking it up after it, and they put it in the stalks, of course, to dry, and it's my job to help pick it up.
What do you mean, pick it up?
They did them and picked them and pulled them in bundles. Right, pick until they had a bundle, they'd put it down crossways in the stalks, between the stalks to dry. And we'd go along in the wagon and pick up those bundles, take it in, stack it, and then the broom corn thresher would come by.
How do you thrash broom corn?
They had a motor, big, almost on the order of a tractor. It was large, with long pulleys on it, and men would hold those bundles on those belts, and then to whip the seeds off. They had to keep towards trimming until they got all the seeds off, and then they would stack that. Or rather, it was baled, and then when they had a baler, and it baled it. And that's.
Was there a broom factory around here?
No, but there's a lot of broom corn raised here and shipped out.
What do you do with the seeds besides saving for plant next year?
Not much of anything.
They're not good for. Okay. What about wheat harvest?
When Dad was doing it, of course, we did it with the old header barge that was prior to combines, and that of course did again. The header was pulled by mules or horses, and then it was unloaded on the header barges, and then taken down and stacked.
Mm-hmm. How many men in a harvest crew?
In doing that, it took generally 2 on the header barge, 1 to drive, which is my job, and then the rest of the man kept it pushed back until they got a load. Then there was 1 on the header, and generally about 4.
Mm-hmm. So you drove the mules? Did the mules pull or push that header?
Pull. They pulled the header, and also I drove of course, the barges, just a big wagon with a slanted bed, of course.
Now, I've heard people say wheat going through the sweat. Have you heard of that before?
What?
Wheat going through the sweat?
Not too much. We didn't hear it, didn't too much.
I just wonder what that was.
Generally, it would draw moisture and it would go through but that's the reason on wheat you generally had to keep turning it, or it draws moisture and would mold until it dried. They would have to keep turning it.
How big were the stacks?
Oh, probably 10 or probably 12, 15 foot long and about probably 6 foot wide.
And how long would it sit there before it was thrashed?
Well, they were generally harvested last of July and then, or June and into July. And it was long about the latter part of August or September before the header barge, or before the old thrashers came by. It's quite a crew, of course, of the thrashing machines. Mm-hmm. And it was a farmer's job to feed them.
Did you help cook for them?
Had to help cook them for them. Then, of course, you started at daylight, and along about 10 o'clock you would take them some refreshments, probably lemonade and maybe cookies or something. And in the afternoon you'd take them sandwiches and drinks along about 3 or 4 o'clock, because they worked then till dark.
Mm-hmm. How many acres of wheat did you have?
We had probably quarter section.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember World War I?
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about it?
The main thing I remember about it is about the flu seeds that we had, because we all had it and Mother had it real bad. They didn't think she was going to pull through. and could remember coming to town to see the soldiers leave. And there was generally a big crowd around when there was a trainload of soldiers that left town. Main things that I remember about it.
How many people died from in that flu epidemic around here?
I can't say for sure, but there was quite a few, but there was several that was real bad and they had it real hard and had after effects, of course, from it. But personally, I don't know of any of my close friends or anything of the sort that died.
What about Armistice Day?
Really don't remember all that much about it, other than I just remember that everybody seemed to be elated, they'd come over. They'd had word that the armistice is signed. Of course, you had mainly the papers or word of mouth then. There wasn't too many, or there wasn't any radios or what have you.
The dust storms, 1930s.
Those I can remember quite well.
Tell me about it.
You could see a cloud moving in. It looked like a storm cloud, but it'd be just a cloud of dirt moving in. When we'd see those coming, we'd grab comforters and what have you to hang over the doors and windows and to try to keep out part of it. I remember one time we were caught out in the car when one up was hit. You couldn't even see the radiator for the dirt. When one of those storms hit, things stopped because you just couldn't see. It'd be just almost like dark. It'd be in the daylight, but it would be dark because it just cut it off the sun and everything. And of course, most of those were moving in from the Panhandle and from Kansas. We had a lot of dust and dirt here, but not those that picked it up here, but not as bad. But of course, there's a lot of drought and a lot of fields blowing.
How long will a dust storm last?
Some of them only an hour or two, but I've seen them last from several hours.
How would you breathe in those dust storms?
With difficulty. If you were really out in it, you had to have something over your nose and mouth. Of course, most people try to stay in but that's the reason we kept trying to cover windows and doors and such, so that it wouldn't be inside where you could breathe all right.
You ever get caught out in a dust storm?
Yes.
How'd you find your way back to the house?
Well, that was the one time I was in the car. We had a Model T. And was caught out in it, and I was never caught out in when it was real. I could be caught in on the first part of it, when it wasn't so bad, where you could see, but it would be just almost a wall of dirt moved in.
What about World War II? What did you do?
Well, my husband, he wasn't my husband at that time. He was in the World War I. During that time, I was working here in Woodward. We moved. I'd gone to school at Alva and met my husband there, and we lived there for about 4 years. Moved to Hutchinson there for about a year, and then came down here in '41. So I was working here in the insurance company.
Did you do any work for the war effort?
Not as such, no.
When did you go to Alva?
Went to school there and went first year in Phillips in 34, 35. No, I take back 20, 32 and 33, and then moved it. The next year I went to Alva for 1 year. Then later went back to Alva.
What'd you study?
Just got a teacher's certificate.
What'd you do when World War II ended? Was there a big celebration here? Woodward?
Not really, everybody was, but to have just a regular celebration, no, we didn't have.
Now, the tornado.
That evening or that afternoon, we had gone out to my folks who lived out just north of Tangier. We had been staying out there, and the folks had gone to with some neighbors to a card game, and so my brother and my sister and her husband and Gus and I were out there staying with my brother just to spend the evening. Along about probably 7 or 8 o'clock, it commenced to get dark and commenced to rain out there. It wasn't long until the lights went out. We had no way of course, out there and know what was going on because it didn't hit there. And but it was raining hard and everything as black as could be. And one of my neighbors, his nephew called him and told him that a tornado had hit Woodward and that his grandmother and grandfather was killed. And then it just had wiped out Woodward, of course. As far as he was concerned, where he was, it was. So about that time, a neighbor south of Tangier came up and got my brother to go to supply because to know that it had hit down in south of Tangier and had killed this fellow's brother, and he was wanting to go to Mega, notify some of their other relatives. And my sister and her husband had started to town prior to that, so we got in the car trying to follow them to see whether they were all right. Thought maybe they'd got in the middle of it, and which they almost did. They were about probably 4 miles northwest of town when their car just stopped. What there was from the vacuum of that tornado, but they didn't realize what it was, but it just stopped. They couldn't get it started for a little while. And by the time they got it started, of course, it was on past, and when they got to, it's out here about where the drive-in is now. Wires, trees, everything all over the road, and surprisingly, they got through. They went on. They lived south of town, and they didn't know but what had hit down there. So they had gone on home. And when we got to town, you could hardly weave your way through all those wires, and of course, most of them were hot that night. Were hot. But and for the next 2 days, of course, I went to the office the next morning about 5 o'clock. And hardly left there for about a week, taking in claims and making up loss reports and what have you. But then they had ambulances from all over from here coming in here, and about every 10 minutes, an ambulance going to the airport. And for about 4 or 5 days, this went on. And all that time, there was never a flat tire. If you tell me how it happened with all those trees, wires, the houses that were blown over and in the streets and what have you, and nails everywhere, and not a flat tire.
How many people were killed in that tornado?
110. Over 1,000 injured.
How big was that tornado?
It started at about Glacier, Texas. It never raised, ordinarily it'll hit and raise back up. It never raised from the time it left Glacier until it hit up in the edge of Kansas. It was about the eye of it, probably a mile wide.
How much damage was done here?
Well, the Red Cross themselves dropped $1 million in here, helping people rebuild and what have you, and the insurance companies paid out another $3 million, besides the ones that wasn't covered. So it was, well, the west and the north part of town was just wiped out. nothing there.
Was there any warning?
No, not really, there wasn't. Because it, as I said, it had never lifted up from the time it hit, first hit. And when they first all I could hear was that roar, but of course most of them didn't know what it sounds. It's like a train coming in. And you had no idea what it was for, what it was until it hit, so no warning at all.
That morning, I've heard that the sky was just a strange color.
The day before?
Yeah.
Not really. It was still, and it was clear, and when we went out that evening, the sun was just setting, and it was just as red could be. You could see it was kind of setting behind a cloud of some sort. But otherwise, it wasn't really all that. It was just an ordinary day, for early in the day.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we have a good interview. Anything else you want to talk about? Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.